All right, so we are live. Hi, everyone. This is Anna STEPCHENKO, your Florida real estate professional, and welcome to my real estate educational series. And today, indeed, we are having a very special broadcast, not only because I'm doing it with a real estate attorney with over 15 years of experience in practice in law, but also because it's a commissioner of the city of Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, #1 Riviera. And without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Dana Goldman. Hi, Dana.
Anna, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be a guest in your series and your presentation and talk about condos, which is very, very core and near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me as your guest.
Thank you, Dana. It's my pleasure. I know that you work around the clock and you are known to be a real estate attorney by the day, city commissioner by the night. How do you manage to combine all of these activities within yourself?
Just a lot of discipline and just make a lot of to-do lists and scratch them off and make more to-do lists. So the to-do lists help a lot.
That's actually a very good tip for our audience, those who want to manage to implement a lot of goals and get a lot of things done. Make a to-do list.
At least 3 to-do lists a day. Lots of technology, 2 phones, 2 desktops, a lot of miles on the car, and a lot of talking, and a very cooperative family.
Well, Dana, I truly believe that all of these qualities contribute to success that you have as a commissioner and as a real estate attorney. And I know that you've been very dedicated to a topic of condominiums because that's part of your real estate career as an attorney. And today I will be happy to continue talking about the condo law. And before we start, I want to mention that as a city commissioner, you implemented and hosted a condo workshop series. I've been attendee of those series, and I want to give you a round of applause because they were truly knowledgeable and informative, and I got a lot of my real estate questions answered. So today I will be happy to talk about condominiums and continue that journey.
And so just to give a little insight why I have such passion for this topic is that I'm one of the attorneys who behind the scenes drafts these covenants and drafts these declarations and drafts the purchase and sale agreements and the forms. So I have a unique insight into some of the issues and questions, as well as the fact that I'm a condominium unit owner. So I not only do it professionally, but I live it day by day. So I am a staunch advocate of unit owner rights. I'm a firm believer that knowledge is power, and especially in a condominium setting where you have to balance your rights and your obligations against those of the others who live in your condominium. So it's really important to understand that. Also, Florida, believe it or not, is the most heavily regulated state in the country on condominium law. Our Condominium Act is over 170 pages, and it really requires a lot of knowledge and insight. And the whole purpose of doing even these condo workshop series is really to bring some of those resources and that information to the residents.
Dana, and I truly agree with you, and not only because of the reasons you mentioned, but also because Florida is considered to be a #2 most growing state population-wise, and we have so many people relocating here from other countries, from up north, and we have a lot of buyers who are switching their single-family home living to a condominium living. And on many occasions, they know very little about what a purchase of a condominium entails and what comes with the actual condo unit. So today I would like you to help us discover what a condominium is and what it entails, what a purchase of a condominium entails. So let's start with the first question. How does the purchase and ownership of a unit in a condominium differ from that of a detached single-family home?
Okay, so in a single family home, in a detached single family home, you own the real property or the dirt and the lot, and then whatever is the improvement to that lot in the terms of the home, and you own that outright in fee simple. But a condominium has a different legal structure because you are one unit owner when you purchase, where you own in fee simple your unit, but you have an undivided interest in the common elements, which is all the property outside of the boundaries of your unit. So you share your ownership of the common elements, the common areas, the structure, the building envelope, so forth. You have a percentage interest in common with other, or fractional interest in common with other unit owners. So you all have ownership interests. It's not just you own it by yourself, you own part of it yourself, and then you own the balance with other unit owners in the overall project. And that makes that even different from ownership in a residential subdivision, which is like a homeowners community where each individual owns their lot and their home, but the association, the governing association, they own the common areas. And so, in fact, in a condominium, your legal description of your unit is derived from your declaration of condominium. So you can get ownership in a home through what's called a plat, but in a condominium as an owner, your legal is derived from that declaration of condominium. And then, of course, you have a governing association that governs the condominium and governs the management and the operation of what's called the common elements of the condominium.
Dana,
So
and
it's
since
a
you mentioned
different structure.
Dana, and like since you mentioned the condo association, I would like to talk a little bit about what a condo association is and what a board of directors is, because these are two separate structures that in a way are intertwined between each other. And a lot of buyers that I work with ask me, so what does the board of directors do? What does the condo association do? So can you please explain a little bit about that?
Okay, so you have different tiers, right? You have, as a unit owner, you own your unit and you're responsible for the maintenance of all that's inside the boundaries of your unit. That is, again, legally described in the Declaration of Condominium. The governing association, which is called the Condominium Association, is a not-for-profit corporation. It's an actual corporation that has its powers to manage the common elements, the condominium property, and they're responsible for implementing or operating the actual condominium and the association. So their jurisdiction or their oversight is into the management of the overall property, and then, of course, implementing the needs, the rules, the regulations, the restrictions. Like any corporation, it has its own structure. So in the corporation itself, which is again a not-for-profit corporation, they have a board of directors, and they are the control people who make the overall decisions about the running of that association. So you have the governing board of directors, and then you have they appoint or direct the officers, which is the president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer. And so in that tier, you have the board that does policy and decision making. And then amongst those, they put together the president, who basically stewards or directs that. Underneath that governing structure, you have the manager or the management, but the manager, which is either through a contract or somebody who's an employee of that corporation, that association, they basically handle the day-to-day operations of the association.
So technically, we can say that the board of directors is the board of directors prevails over the condo association. Would that be a right thing to say?
Yes, they basically set policy and establish standards. So where are the powers of the board of directors derived from? Well, they have powers through the Not-for-Profit Corporation Act, which is in the Florida statutes. They also have powers through Chapter 718, which is the Florida Condominium Act. And their powers are established through the Articles of Incorporation or the bylaws of the association, what directors can and cannot do. And the same goes for the officers, like the president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer. So those powers or responsibilities or authority is derived from all these different places. And then, of course, in the Declaration of Condominium to a certain extent. So they're enumerated and spelled out and subject to the laws, the Florida law.
Dana, thank you so much. Now I'm sure that everyone has a better understanding what the difference between the board of directors and the condo association management is. And I would like to talk a little bit about the basic rights and the basic obligations of a unit owner. So when a person buys a unit, they have no idea what's awaiting for them. So can you please explain in general what rights do condo have and what obligations they have to meet as unit owners?
So the rights of unit owners is especially as the association is in the control of the unit owners. Their rights are not as great as, say, the rights of the board of directors, but they do have some rights, and that includes their ability to vote, typically on an annual basis, to elect their board of directors. They have a right to inspect the records of the association. That's a very fundamental right. A lot of records are on a website for certain larger associations, but if they're not readily available, they can inspect those. Unit owners have the right to attend meetings of the boards of directors or unit owner association meetings, and they have a right to receive financial reports. So each association has a responsibility based upon their level of economic activity to put out, whether it's a cash report or an audited financial statement, depending upon their level of revenues. But they are required to put out those reports, and unit owners have a right to receive those reports and that information. Because again, as a unit owner, you own a part of that condominium. So you have a right to know how the association is spending the money that you're paying in each month or each quarter, the case may be. Now, in terms of the obligations of the unit owners, the big obligation, of course, is the obligation to pay assessments, right? So there's a statutory obligation. So many unit owners, many residents ask over time, well, let's say I'm on vacation for a couple of months and I go to Europe and I'm not going to use the pool or I'm not going to use the tennis court. Why do I have to pay assessments? And the answer is because you have to pay, because there's a statutory obligation to pay. And if you don't pay your assessments, the association has the right to lien your property and enforce that lien and get a judgment or collect on that. So that your main obligation is to pay for all of the needs of the condominium property and the condominium association, and whether that's landscaping or to compensate the manager or to pay for upgrades to the common areas or so forth. That is your main obligation. And secondary to that, you're obligated to conform or to abide by the rules and regulations and restrictions that that condominium has, and that is pursuant to the Declaration of Condominium and, of course, the rules and regulations that the association adopts. So again, when you're in a common interest community, such as a condominium, you have to live next door to 100 people or 200 people or 500 people. So you're obligated to abide by those rules and to obey them.
It's very important to obey the rules, indeed. I work with a lot of buyers, buyers from all over the United States, from other countries in the world, and they always ask me, Anna, how do special assessments work? Because we know that here in Florida, we have a 40-year certification rule, and we know that condominiums on many occasions implement or impose special assessments for fixing the elevators or repairing the lobbies or whatever else it may be. And such buyers want to know on what basis such assessments are implemented, and they ask, well, what if I don't want to pay? I own a unit, but I don't want to pay this assessment. So how does this whole system work, and what number of votes does the board require in order for this special assessment to be levied?
Okay, so special assessments really, in my opinion, occur because associations start out without collecting reserves. So even in my condominium association, we have literally three ongoing special assessments right now that we're paying.
Sure.
And that's crazy.
Yes.
An association shouldn't be levying a special assessment every single year. They should either be increasing their level of general assessments, or they should be collecting reserves for capital expenditures, deferred maintenance, large scale projects, whether it's repaving the roads or roofing or so forth. But the trap that many associations get into is unit owners typically want to waive reserves, so it's pay me now or pay me later. So if an association doesn't have reserves for the rainy day when the roof needs to be replaced or the roads need to be repaved, or the big ticket items, or they're structural or delamination, or for whatever reason, then the association doesn't have enough money in their operating account to really cover those big expenditures, and they don't want to raise the regular assessments, so they get into the pattern of levying special assessments. So if the question is, how can associations get away with levying these special assessments, the answer is they absolutely have the right. And I'm going to read from the Condominium Act. The specific purpose or purposes of any special assessment, including any contingent special assessment levied in conjunction with the purchase of an insurance policy, shall be set forth in a written notice of such assessment sent or delivered to each unit owner. The funds collected pursuant to a special assessment shall be only used for the specific purpose or purposes set forth in such notice. However, upon completion of such specific purpose or purposes, any excess funds will be considered common surplus and may either be returned or applied as a credit. So the authority to levy a special assessment is typically in your declaration of condominium. And that's why it's so important to be well versed and read your declaration, because typically in your declaration, it's going to say, hey, we have the right to collect assessments. We have the right to collect special assessments. And depending upon how the declaration reads, either the board can pass the special assessment without a unit owner vote, or in some cases, the unit owner vote is required to levy that special assessment. So you have to read your documents, read your declaration of condominium. It could be in the bylaws. There's some statutory authority for it, and they absolutely have the right to do it. Is it the best practice? No. The best practice is for associations to collect reserves, and then they have the money for the rainy day.
And I know that in Florida, we do not have the law that requires condo associations to have a certain percentage of reserves, because some condominiums have over 10% reserves and some condominiums have zero. So it's important to address to the potential buyers that if you want high chances of not colliding with special assessments in the nearest future, you have to read the bylaws and you need to ensure that the condo association has reserves.
Right. And so there are four main categories for reserves, but essentially every year the unit owners have the right to waive or reduce the amount of reserves. So if a developer, for example, in a new project, if they do decide to waive reserves because the developer doesn't want to pay the reserves in the beginning, then what happens is you get into the pattern. But if in the beginning it's set up where reserves are collected, it stands to reason that the unit owners will say, you know what, we think that's right, and we're not going to waive the reserves. But certainly unit owners have the right to waive the reserves. But then in the end, they're going to get socked with special assessments because buildings get old, buildings age, just like people age.
Sure.
And you got to fix and you got to replace, and the pipe bursts or something happens, or you want to, resurface the pool. Whatever you need, you're going to need those special assessments if you don't have the money in your account to make those improvements.
Dana, and if the condo association allows unit owners to vote before the special assessment is levied, what number of votes are needed in a percentage concept for the assessment to be levied?
That is all derived from your declaration of condominium. So it's a case-by-case basis. And that's the point. Whatever is in your declaration. And again, by statute, the association, the board is required to give a notice to say, the association can't just say, okay, we want $5 million and not tell you what it's for. They need to have a line item. And then let's say they levy a $5 million special assessment. They can't have a list that's a mile long and then use the money for something else, right? By statute, they have to use it for the purposes for which it was intended, and then either, as a credit or so forth. So there is somewhat of a guideline as to how these special assessments can be used. But buildings get old, and buildings need to, and you have 40-year recertifications, and you have all sorts of things that come up. And of course, you want to keep the building in good condition. So that is what's behind some of these special assessments. But it's unfortunate. The interesting part about special assessments is that unit owners say, well, if I'm buying a unit and I don't want to pay, we're in the middle of a special assessment, and the buyer says, I don't want to be responsible for that special assessment. But the reality is, when you own that unit at the time of ownership, you are responsible for that special assessment. So typically the buyer and seller want to make some sort of an arrangement as to who's really going to be responsible for what prior to or at the time of closing.
And I think it's also important to remind those people who are looking to buy that if you are buying a condominium, by law, the seller has to present you a current copy of the budget, of the condo docs, and you have 3 days normally to review them, correct?
Right. But in a new condominium, a developer project, not a resale, there is a 15-day rescission period. But in a resale, there is only a 3-day rescission period. And there are requirements. You have to give the documents, the receipt, and so forth in the various different scenarios. But it's true, you're going to get an estoppel, as you're familiar with estoppel certificates, where the estoppel is going to tell you exactly what are the special assessments pending, what's owed on the unit, and give you some very important criteria that you need to close that sale, right? And to make that purchase.
And that's very important. So we highly encourage buyers to read these documents because they are very essential, and they will have an endless impact on your ownership of the unit that you buy.
Also, as a buyer, whether you're going to buy as an investor or you're going to buy this as a vacation home or your primary home, your homestead, and as the case may be, it's very important to understand some of these covenants and restrictions that are contained in the Declaration of Condominium. For example, if you're buying as an investor, if you're not reading the provisions in that Declaration of Condominium that say you can only rent no less than 2 months, or you have no restrictions, or there's a refusal right, or any type of rental restrictions or obligations, you have to get association approval or anything like that. If you're investing in a condominium unit, you want to be sure to understand very fundamentally things like rental restrictions, pet restrictions, occupancy restrictions, other restrictions that are going to affect you and your purchase in that particular unit.
And that's what's important for buyers to understand, because when you drive in Sunny Isles and you see all of these beautiful condominiums, you need to really comprehend that each condominium is a whole separate entity, whole separate government, and each condo has its own set of rules and regulations. That's why no condominium is the same, and you really have to investigate and research, depending on your criteria, what condos you need to focus on to make a successful purchase.
Right, as well as the amenities. So the way we describe a declaration of condominium, it's a contract. That's what it is. It's a contract between you and the condominium, the association, and so forth. So you have to view it as a contract. And that runs, but that also, it's what we describe as it runs with the land. So it's so important to really understand, because every project is unique. Some projects restrict, some are age restricted, some are pet restricted, some have all sorts of different nuances. But the drafter of those documents always has that project in mind. And it's so important to really understand what you're buying.
Absolutely. Dana, and now I would like to talk about monthly maintenance fees, because normally common areas insurance is included in your monthly maintenance fees that you pay on a regular basis. And a lot of unit owners, a lot of buyers ask me a question, well, why would I have to buy my own HO6 policy, my own insurance, if I already pay the insurance in my monthly maintenance fees? So can you please fill us in on how does insurance work in a condominium?
Okay, that's a great question. So the Condominium Act has very specific and detailed provisions about insurance obligations, but the main there is a requirement in the Condominium Act that the contents and personal property of the unit are not insured through the condominium association. So if damage is sustained to the interior of your unit through whatever, unless it's the fault of the negligence of your neighbor or the fault of the association, anything that's inside the contents of your unit, you are responsible for. So the Condominium Act does not require you to get insurance, but your lender might require it as a condition to obtaining a mortgage. So you have to always check from a lending standpoint whether or not you're going to need insurance on your unit. But things like flood insurance, public liability and the common elements, if somebody slips and falls on the pavers in the common areas, that's obviously the insurance obligation of the association. things like any damage or insurability of the building envelope, the structure, directors and officers insurance, errors and omissions insurance, different types of insurance, anything that's outside of the unit, or again, things like flood, those are the obligation of the association. And of course, especially during times of COVID, insurance premiums rates are going up. They're going to continue to rise, and in some ways, it's a big expense of a condominium association, but it's somewhat of a buffer because, as you can imagine, in a detached single-family home, you have much bigger insurance obligations personally because you have to insure again the structure,
everything,
the home, everything. And in a condominium, you share the burden with other units.
A lot of buyers ask me a question: what if I get flooded because the pipe above me, the pipe in the ceiling, broke? So that's a very tricky question because the pipe is not a responsibility of the unit owner. However, if it leaks, then it damages personal property of the unit owner. So normally, how would that work?
It is a very tricky and a very complex area because it just depends, right? Is the pipe a pipe that serves only your unit? If the pipe broke in your bathroom that serves only your unit, you're responsible. Does the description of the unit include the drywall, or does it not include the drywall? Is it the association's responsibility to replace the drywall? Then it could be. If it's a leak that goes on for a long period of time, maybe the insurance carrier will not commit to paying for it, and maybe you'd have to fight with the association. So it just depends. If it's a pipe that if it's the damage was caused by the unit owner upstairs, maybe it's their responsibility and it's not the responsibility of the association. But if it's a pipe that bursts, that is a pipe that serves multiple units and it's considered outside of the unit or a common element pipe, then maybe it's the association. So it typically ends up being a strong question of fact and something that where multiple parties get involved, and then there's some insurance obligation. So it really is very fact specific.
It is a very
is it a casualty event like that, or is it something that's a drip leak that occurs over a 2-year period? It all depends. It's very fact specific.
It's very fact specific, but I think that's why it's very important for each condo owner to purchase his own HO6 policy to ensure that in the event an accident occurs, he will be covered no matter what, more or less.
I think I couldn't have said it better. That's absolutely the case, because clearly in the Condominium Act, the association is not responsible for the interior contents. So the best advice is get the HO6 policy, maintain the HO6 policy. Now, mold. There are some categories that are excluded, right? So you have to read the policy carefully, because you may think you're buying an HO6 policy and then you get mold on the wall and then you find out it's been excluded. So you have to really study that very carefully and make sure you have a good insurance agent that will be able to, navigate through what's included and what's excluded from that policy.
Absolutely. It's important to read, because on many occasions, and I mean, I put myself in the same category, we want to pay as little as possible, but at the same time, it's important to ensure that you have all of the necessary occurrences covered in your policy.
Right. Property damage, there's differences between public liability, property damage, so forth. There are multiple lines of insurance, multiple levels of insurance. So I defer to the insurance experts on those subjects.
Absolutely, Dana. Well, we've been talking for 35 minutes, and the time has just flown. It's very interesting to talk to you because you provide such diverse information, and I'm sure that everyone who's been watching us and who will be watching the recording of this broadcast will discover a lot of interesting facts about buying a condominium and owning a condominium in Florida, and I will be delighted to do more live broadcasts with you about condominium topics in the future. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you, and we will meet with you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.